welcome and settle in comfortably. Tonight, we journey back to one of history's most controlled societies, where ordinary people lived under the watchful eye of an all-encompassing state. In the Soviet Union, under Joseph Stalin, from the late 1920s through the 1950s, daily existence was shaped by a peculiar mixture of genuine idealism, grinding hardship, and ever-present fear. Please consider subscribing to the channel and drop a comment below. Imagine yourself drifting back through time to a world where every conversation might be overheard, where loyalty was measured not just by your actions, but by your thoughts, and where the promise of a worker's paradise collided with the harsh realities of surveillance, shortages, and suspicion. This was a time when millions of people went about their daily routines, standing in bread lines, attending political meetings, raising their children, all while navigating an invisible web of rules and expectations that could shift without warning. As you listen tonight, picture the gray Moscow winters, the cramped communal apartments, the factory whistles marking time. Feel the weight of a society where everyone watched everyone else, where survival often depended on saying the right thing at the right moment, and where the line between citizen and potential enemy of the state was thinner than most people dared to imagine. Let yourself sink deeper into your bed as we explore this complex world, where human resilience found ways to flourish even in the most restrictive circumstances, and where the simple act of living required a kind of quiet courage that most of us can barely fathom today. Tonight, we'll walk through their world together, understanding not just the politics and the purges, but the small, daily moments that made up life for millions of Soviet citizens during one of history's most tightly controlled eras. The alarm clock's shrill ring cuts through the Moscow dawn at 5:30 in the morning, just as it does in communal apartments across the vast Soviet Union. You share this sound with 7 other families in your building, their movements beginning to stir through the thin walls that divide your lives into cramped, carefully allocated spaces. The rhythm of collective living has become as natural as breathing the shuffle of felt slippers on worn wooden floors, the distant sound of someone pumping water at the communal sink, the careful whispers of neighbors who've learned that even the walls might be listening. Your room measures exactly 12 square meters, shared with your spouse and 2 children. The walls are painted that particular shade of institutional green that seems to appear in every Soviet building, from schools to factories to government offices. A single window faces the courtyard, where icicles hang like frozen tears from the building's edge, and where you can glimpse other windows, other lives, other families beginning their careful daily dance of survival and surveillance. The radiator coughs and gurgles, providing just enough heat to take the edge off the bitter cold that seeps through the poorly insulated walls. You dress quickly, layering wool and cotton in the practiced manner of someone who has learned to conserve every degree of warmth. Your clothes are functional rather than fashionably thick wool coat that's seen 5 winters, boots that you've resoled twice, and the ever-present woolen hat that marks you as a Soviet citizen as surely as your internal passport. Breakfast is a study in making do with what's available. The bread ration provides dark, dense loaves that fill the stomach, if not the soul. You spread a thin layer of butter when it's available, or more often, a bit of lard, saved from the precious allocation you received last week. Tea, strong and black, warms your hands as much as your throat. Steam rising from the chipped glass that's held your morning ritual for the past 3 years. Your children eat in silence, not from sadness, but from the learned understanding that mornings are for preparations, for gathering the mental armor needed to navigate another day in a world where being noticed can be as dangerous as being ignored. Their school uniforms are pressed and clean, the red neckerchiefs of the young pioneers, bright against the gray wool of their jackets. They have been taught to be proud of these symbols, to understand that they represent something larger than themselves. something that demands both their loyalty and their vigilance. The walk to work takes you through streets that tell the story of a society in constant transformation. Construction sites dot the landscape, skeletal frameworks of new apartment blocks rising toward the perpetually overcast sky. Workers in quilted jackets move like ants around these sites, their breath forming small clouds in the cold air. Their movements efficient and purposeful. These buildings represent the promise of the future more space, better living conditions, the gradual improvement of life under socialism. But they also represent the present reality, dust, noise, canned disruption of a city, being rebuilt according to someone else's vision. You pass the bread queue that's already forming outside the state bakery, even though the shop won't open for another 2 hours. The people in line stand with the patience of those who understand that waiting is simply part of life. Their conversations muted and careful. You recognize some faces: the woman from the apartment 3 blocks over, the man who works at a textile factory, the elderly pensioner who always seems to know which shops might have unexpected deliveries of meat or vegetables. These queues are more than just a necessity. They're a social institution. In line, you hear whispered news about which stores might have received shipments, which officials have been transferred or promoted, which neighbors have received visits from men in dark coats. Information flows like an underground river, vital and dangerous, connecting the sprawling city through networks of carefully shared knowledge. Your workplace is a testament to Soviet industrial ambition, a massive factory complex that produces agricultural machinery for collective farms across the Union. The building stretches for what seems like kilometers, smokestacks reaching toward the sky like fingers grasping for something just beyond reach. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of machine oil and metal shavings. The constant rhythm of production, creating a kind of industrial lullaby that becomes the soundtrack of your working life. The workday begins with the morning meeting, where production targets are announced, and workers who have exceeded their quotas are publicly recognized. These meetings serve multiple purposes. They communicate the goals of the day. They celebrate achievement, and they subtly remind everyone that performance is constantly monitored. It's the factory director, a man whose party credentials are as carefully maintained as his production numbers, speaks with the confident authority of someone who understands that his position depends on keeping both his workers and his superiors satisfied. You work alongside people who become more than colleagues. There, your extended family in this world where trust must be carefully measured and distributed. There's Mikhail, whose jokes somehow manage to find humor without crossing into dangerous territory. There's Svetlana, whose efficiency at her lathe has made her a model worker, and whose quiet competence has earned her the kind of respect that doesn't require political speeches. And there's Boris, whose father disappeared during the Purges of the late 30s, and who has learned to work with dedication while keeping his thoughts carefully locked away. The work itself requires both skill and endurance. You operate machinery that was built to last, heavy and reliable, but requiring constant attention and maintenance. The rhythm of the factory floor becomes a kind of meditation, the steady thrum of the machines, the precise movements required to maintain quality and safety, the satisfaction of creating something tangible and useful. Production quotas loom over every shift, numerical targets that represent not just economic goals, but political obligations. During the lunch break, you gather with your work brigade in the factory canteen, where the food is plain but filling: cabbage soup, dark bread, and occasionally a bit of meat. The conversations flow around safe topics: the weather, sports results, plans for the upcoming holiday celebrations. But beneath these surface discussions, there's a constant undercurrent of awareness. Everyone knows that productivity reports are filed regularly, that work relationships are noted and evaluated, that the line between personal friendship and political reliability must be carefully maintained. The afternoon shift brings its own rhythm. It's different from the morning's energy, but equally purposeful. As the light outside the small factory windows begins to fade, the artificial lighting casts everything in a yellow glow that makes the workspace feel both intimate and institutional. You find yourself falling into the meditative state that experienced workers know well your hands, knowing their tasks so completely that your mind can wander to thoughts of family, of weekend plans, of the small pleasures that make life worth living, even in the most controlled circumstances. The end of the workday brings both relief and a different kind of tension. The factory gates release hundreds of workers into the darkening streets, where the evening's activities must be carefully chosen. Some head directly home to their families. Some stop at the few shops that might still have goods available. And others attend the political meetings or cultural events that demonstrate proper civic engagement. Your evening journey home takes you past the local party headquarters, where the windows glow with warm light and you can glimpse the offices where decisions that affect your daily life are made. The building represents both authority and opportunities, where careers are made and destroyed, where the interpretation of policy becomes the reality of daily existence, where the gap between ideological promise and practical implementation is quietly negotiated by men and women whose names you'll never know. The communal apartment welcomes you back with its familiar sounds and smells. Dinner is prepared collectively in the shared kitchen, where your neighbors navigate the delicate dance of sharing limited space and resources. Conversations drift between families, creating a web of connection that provides both comfort and careful surveillance. Everyone knows everyone else's business, not from malice, but from the simple reality of living in such close quarters. As the evening progresses, you help your children with their homework, reviewing lessons that emphasize not just mathematics and literature, but also the proper understanding of Soviet values and achievements. Their textbooks tell stories of heroic workers, brilliant scientists, and wise leaders, creating a worldview where individual effort serves collective goals and where questioning the system is not just unpatriotic, but unthinkable. Before sleep, you might listen to the radio, where approved music and news broadcasts provide the day's official interpretation of events, both domestic and international. The voices are calm and authoritative, presenting a world where Soviet achievements are constantly celebrated, and where any problems are temporary obstacles on the path to inevitable progress. These broadcasts become part of the rhythm of daily life, a constant background presence that shapes understanding without demanding active attention. And as you finally settle into your narrow bed, sharing the small room with your sleeping family, you might reflect on the curious nature of your existence. You are part of something vast and ambitious, a society attempting to reshape human nature itself according to scientific principles and idealistic goals. Yet you are also just a person with hopes and fears and small daily pleasures that have little to do with politics or ideology. The tension between these realities, between the grand historical moment and the simple human need for dignity, security, and quiet happiness defines not just your individual experience, but the experience of millions of people trying to build meaningful lives within a system that promises everything while watching everything. But sleep doesn't come easily in this world, where the darkness brings its own peculiar anxieties. In the quiet hours after midnight, you might hear the soft creak of footsteps in the hallway, the whispered conversation between neighbors, or the distant sound of a car engine idling in the courtyard below. These sounds carry weight in a society where the night often brings visitors, whose arrival no one anticipates and whose purposes no one questions aloud. Your neighbor, Ivan Petrovich, who shares the communal kitchen and whose children play with yours in the courtyard, maintains the careful balance that defines social relationships in this carefully monitored world. During the day, he's a model citizen, arriving at his job at the municipal planning office precisely on time, attending political meetings with appropriate enthusiasm, and contributing to discussions about production quotas and housing improvements with the kind of practical wisdom that demonstrates both competence and loyalty. Yet even Ivan carries the invisible burden of living under constant valuation. His employment file, stored in the personnel department of his workplace, contains not just records of his work performance, but detailed notes about his political reliability, his social associations, and the content of casual conversations overheard by colleagues whose own files might depend on their willingness to report such observations. These documents form an intricate network of paper surveillance that parallels and reinforces the human networks of observation and reporting. The morning brings its own rituals of documentation and verification. Your internal passport, that small booklet that determines where you can live, where you can work, and where you can travel, must be presented at regular intervals to demonstrate that you are precisely where you're supposed to be. The passport contains your photograph, your employment history, your residential registration, and the crucial stamp that marks your political status, whether you are a full citizen, a person with restricted movement, or someone whose past associations require ongoing monitoring at your workplace. The morning begins not just with production targets, but with the quiet ritual of the personnel review. Your supervisor, a woman whose own position depends on maintaining both productivity and political compliance among her workers, maintains detailed files on each person under her authority. These files contain work evaluations, reports of political attitudes expressed during meetings, observations about personal behavior, and notes about social relationships, both within and outside the factory. The system operates with a kind of bureaucratic efficiency that makes surveillance feel almost natural, like another aspect of the orderly management of socialist production. Forms are filed, reports are submitted, and evaluations are recorded with the same methodical precision applied to tracking raw materials, finished products, and production quotas. The paperwork of political control becomes indistinguishable from the paperwork of economic management, creating a comprehensive system of documentation that touches every aspect of daily life. Your work brigade meets not just to discuss production goals, but to engage in the ritual of self-criticism and mutual evaluation that reinforces both productivity and political conformity. These meetings follow a careful protocol. Workers identify areas where their own performance could improve. Colleagues offer constructive observations about each other's work habits, and the brigade leader guides discussions toward conclusions that demonstrate proper political consciousness and commitment to collective goals. During these sessions, you learn to speak in a careful language that demonstrates both personal responsibility and political awareness. When production falls short of targets, the discussion focuses on technical improvements and enhanced effort rather than systemic problems. When workers face personal difficulties, the solutions involve better application of socialist principles rather than acknowledgement of structural limitations. The vocabulary itself becomes a form of surveillance, requiring constant attention to the political implications of even seemingly neutral observations. The factory's party representative, quiet man whose presence is felt more than seen, moves through the workspace with the authority of someone who understands that his role involves observation as much as guidance. His office, located near the main entrance where he can monitor the comings and goings of workers, contains files that document not just party membership and political activities, but detailed assessments of worker reliability, family situations, and social connections that might influence political attitudes. These assessments follow workers throughout their careers, creating a kind of invisible biography that parallels their official employment history. Promotions, transfers, and opportunities for advancement depend not just on technical competence, but on political evaluations that consider factors ranging from enthusiasm at political meetings to the political reliability of family members and close friends. The system creates incentives for careful behavior that extend far beyond the workplace into the most intimate aspects of personal life. During lunch break, conversations in the factory canteen are shaped by the understanding that the room contains not just workers seeking nutrition and social connection, but individuals whose survival may depend on their ability to gather and report information about their colleagues' attitudes and associations. This knowledge doesn't prevent friendship or genuine human connection, okay? But it adds a layer of careful calculation to even the most casual interactions. The afternoon shift brings its own rhythms of observation and documentation. Productivity is monitored not just in terms of output, but in terms of attitude, cooperation, and enthusiasm. Workers who meet their quotas while maintaining obvious reluctance or skepticism find themselves subject to additional scrutiny, while those who exceed targets while demonstrating proper political consciousness become models for others to emulate. The factory's suggestion box, prominently displayed near the main entrance, serves multiple purposes in this carefully monitored environment. Workers can submit ideas for improving production, requests for better working conditions, or proposals for enhancing workplace culture. But the box also serves as a mechanism for reporting concerns about colleagues, supervisors, or conditions that might reflect poorly on management's political reliability. These suggestions are reviewed not just by factory management, but by party representatives who evaluate them for both practical merit and political implications. Ideas that improve productivity while demonstrating proper socialist consciousness are celebrated and implemented. Suggestions that imply criticism of the system or its representatives are carefully investigated, and their authors may find themselves subject to additional education or evaluation. The evening journey home takes you past the local party headquarters, where the lights in the windows represent not just administrative activity, but the constant work of political monitoring and evaluation. Inside those offices, reports are compiled from workplaces, schools, apartment buildings, and community organizations, creating a comprehensive picture of political attitudes and social relationships that guides decisions about everything from housing assignments to career opportunities. Your apartment building has its own informal network of observation and reporting, centered around the building superintendent, whose responsibilities extend far beyond maintenance and rent collection. The superintendent maintains detailed knowledge of resident schedules, visitors, and activities, information that may be shared with authorities when questions arise about particular individuals or families. The communal kitchen becomes a space where the domestic surveillance network operates with particular intensity. Conversations about family matters, work situations, or community events are conducted with the awareness that other residents are present and listening. The sharing of food, cooking responsibilities, cleaning duties creates opportunities for observation that extend into the most private aspects of family life. Children navigate this environment with a particular adaptability of youth, learning to balance the political education they receive at school with the more complex realities they observe at home and in their neighborhoods. Their homework assignments often require them to report on community activities, family discussions, or observations about local conditions, creating a system of surveillance that operates through the innocent curiosity of childhood. The evening news broadcast heard throughout the apartment building as families gather around their radio sets provides not just information about national and international events, but a framework for understanding how individual experiences should be interpreted within the broader context of socialist development. The broadcasts create a shared vocabulary for discussing current events while reinforcing the official perspective on everything from economic achievements to international relations. As the evening progresses toward night, the apartment building settles into the careful quiet of people who understand that even their private conversations might be overheard and evaluated. Families speak in low voices about their hopes, concerns, and plans, always aware that the line between acceptable private discussion and potentially dangerous political commentary must be carefully maintained. The bedtime routine includes not just physical preparation for sleep, but mental preparation for another day of navigating the complex landscape of surveillance and documentation. Tomorrow will bring new opportunities to demonstrate loyalty, new challenges in maintaining the careful balance between individual needs and collective requirements, and new tests of the social skills required to thrive in a society where being noticed can be as dangerous as being ignored. And in the quiet moments before sleep finally comes, you might reflect on the peculiar intimacy of living under constant observation. The system of surveillance creates not just fear and constraint, but also a strange kind of community where everyone understands the rules of the game and works together to navigate them successfully. The shared experience of living under such scrutiny creates bonds of mutual understanding and protection, even as it requires everyone to maintain careful distances and calculated silences. Morning arrives with a particular quality of light that filters through Moscow's perpetually overcast sky, casting everything in shades of gray that seem to mirror the careful neutrality required of daily conversation. You wake to the sound of your neighbor's radio, broadcasting the morning news in the measured tones that have become as familiar as your own heartbeat. The announcer's voice carries the authority of the state, delivering reports of agricultural successes, industrial achievements, and international developments with the confidence of someone who never questions the information they're conveying. But even as these official narratives filled the morning air, you and your neighbors have developed your own subtle language for navigating the gap between public pronouncements and private reality. This language operates through glances, gestures, and carefully chosen words that convey meaning without crossing the invisible lines that separate acceptable discussion from dangerous dissent. It's a language learned through necessity, refined through practice, and passed along through the kind of wordless education that parents give their children and experienced workers share with newcomers. The bread queue this morning stretches longer than usual, snaking around the corner of the bakery and into the narrow street beyond. The people waiting don't complain openly about the delay or speculate too loudly about supply shortages, but their conversations carry subtle codes that experienced listeners can decode. When someone mentions that their cousin in Leningrad is visiting family more often these days, others understand this might mean food supplies are better elsewhere. When an elderly woman observes that the weather has been unpredictable lately, the comment might refer to political changes that affect distribution systems. These conversations represent a kind of gentle resistance, not against the system itself, but against the isolation that complete surveillance might otherwise create. People find ways to share information, express concern for each other, and maintain human connections despite the knowledge that their words might be remembered and reported. The language they use is careful, but not fearful, practical, rather, than rebellious. It's focused on survival and community rather than protest or opposition. Your workplace provides its own environment for this subtle communication. During the morning production meeting, when the factory director announces that temporary adjustments to supply schedules require enhanced worker flexibility, everyone understands that raw material shortages will require creative solutions and longer hours. When a colleague mentions that his brother-in-law is exploring new opportunities in agricultural management, others recognize this as a euphemism for assignment to a collective farm, possibly as punishment for some unspecified infraction. The factory floor itself becomes a space where this coded communication operates most effectively. The noise of machinery provides cover for conversations that might be overheard in quieter settings. Tate, in the shared work, creates natural opportunities. for brief exchanges of information and mutual support. Workers develop signals that can communicate warnings, reassurances, or simple human acknowledgement without attracting attention from supervisors or party representatives. Mikhail, who operates the lathe next to yours, has perfected a system of subtle gestures that can convey information about everything from machine problems to changes in supervision schedules. It's a particular way of adjusting his safety glasses might indicate that the party representative is making his rounds. It's a specific pattern of tool organization might suggest that productivity quotas are being adjusted. These signals operate below the level of conscious surveillance, creating a network of communication that enhances both safety and efficiency. The lunch break brings opportunities for more extended communication. But even in the factory canteen, conversations must navigate the careful balance between human connection and political safety. Workers share news about their families, discuss plans for the upcoming holiday celebrations, and exchange information about everything from housing situations to children's educational opportunities. But all of these conversations are conducted with an awareness that the room contains individuals whose survival might depend on their willingness to report curating observations to appropriate authorities. Svetlana, whose efficiency at her workstation has made her a model worker, has developed a particular skill for guiding conversations toward safe topics while still allowing for genuine human exchange. She might redirect a potentially dangerous discussion about supply shortages toward a comparison of different cooking techniques for stretching available ingredients. She can transform complaints about housing conditions into practical advice for improving comfort in small spaces. Her approach demonstrates how skilled individuals can maintain community and mutual support while avoiding the kind of political commentary that might attract unwanted attention. The afternoon shift brings its own opportunities for this subtle form of communication and resistance. As the light outside the factory windows begins to fade, workers settle into the rhythms that allow for both productive work and careful conversation. The repetitive nature of many industrial tasks creates spaces for thought and observation that can be shared through glances, gestures, and carefully chosen words. Boris, whose father disappeared during the Purges and who has learned to navigate the system with particular care, demonstrates how personal tragedy can be transformed into practical wisdom. He never speaks directly about his loss, but his advice to younger workers about maintaining proper documentation, avoiding unnecessary political discussions, and focusing on work performance carries the weight of hard-earned experience. His mentorship represents a form of resistance that operates through protection and education rather than opposition or protest. The suggestion box near the factory entrance serves not just as a mechanism for official feedback, but as a kind of barometer for worker sentiment and administrative attention. Workers who understand the system learn to use it strategically, submitting suggestions that demonstrate proper political consciousness while addressing real workplace concerns. The art lies in framing genuine problems in language that attributes them to technical challenges or implementation difficulties rather than systemic issues. Some suggestions focus on worker safety, framed in terms of protecting valuable human resources for increased productivity. Others address efficiency concerns by proposing better organization of workflows or improved maintenance schedules. The most sophisticated suggestions manage to address real quality of life issues by connecting them to broader goals of socialist development and worker satisfaction. The evening journey home provides opportunities for a different kind of coded communication as neighbors and acquaintances encounter each other in the neutral territory of the street. These brief exchanges often carry more information than longer conversations in more monitored environments. A quick update on a family member's health might actually convey news about political developments. A comment about changes in local shops might indicate broader economic shifts or policy adjustments. The walk takes you past the local party headquarters, where the evening lights revealed silhouettes of people working late into the night on the administrative tasks that maintain political control. These buildings represent the nerve centers of the surveillance system, but they also employ ordinary people who share many of the same daily concerns as their neighbors. The party officials who compile reports and make decisions about housing assignments, work transfers, and educational opportunities are themselves subject to evaluation and oversight that requires careful attention to political correctness and procedural compliance. Your apartment building provides the most intimate setting for this careful communication system. The communal spaces become theaters for performances of political correctness that everyone understands to be partly theatrical. Conversations about community improvement projects demonstrate proper civic engagement while allowing residents to coordinate practical solutions to shared problems. Discussions about children's educational achievements show appropriate pride in socialist educational systems, while sharing information about opportunities and challenges that affect family planning. The evening meal preparation in the shared kitchen creates opportunities for the kind of detailed information exchange that helps families navigate the complex systems that govern access to goods, services, and opportunities. Women might discuss which shops have received unexpected deliveries, which officials have been transferred or promoted, and which bureaucratic procedures have been simplified or complicated by recent policy changes. This information flows through networks of mutual assistance that operate alongside and sometimes in subtle opposition to official distribution systems. Children play their own roles in this complex communication system, their natural curiosity and mobility making them valuable sources of information about neighborhood activities, school policies, and family situations. But children also require careful education about the boundaries between innocent sharing and potentially dangerous reporting. Parents must teach them to be observant and helpful while avoiding the kind of detailed reporting that might put their own families or their friends at risk. The bedtime routine includes not physical preparation for sleep, but the mental process of reviewing the day's communications and interactions, which conversations might have been overheard, what information was shared, and with whom, which relationships require careful attention, and which represent sources of genuine support and security. These mental calculations become as automatic as brushing teeth or checking that doors are locked in the darkness of your small room. Sharing space with your sleeping family, you might reflect on the remarkable human capacity for adaptation and connection. The system of surveillance creates constant pressure and constraint, but it has also generated forms of communication and community that operate through subtlety, wisdom, and mutual protection. People have learned not just to survive, but to maintain dignity, friendship, and hope within circumstances that might otherwise isolate and demoralize them. The sounds of the night in your apartment building tell their own story of this careful balance between surveillance and community. The soft murmur of conversations through thin walls, the gentle closing of doors, the careful footsteps in hallways, all demonstrate how people have learned to live together under circumstances that require constant attention to the political implications of even the most private activities. And as sleep finally approaches, you carry with you the complex satisfaction of having navigated another day successfully, maintaining the relationships and connections that make life meaningful, while respecting the boundaries that ensure safety. Tomorrow will bring new challenges and opportunities, new tests of the social skills that have become essential for survival, and new chances to demonstrate the quiet courage that allows ordinary people to maintain their humanity even in the most carefully controlled circumstances. The system has shaped the language, the relationships, and the daily routines. But it has not eliminated the fundamental human needs for connection, communication, and community. These needs find expression through adapted forms that are both constrained by political reality and liberated by human creativity and resilience. In the space between complete conformity and dangerous resistance, Ordinary people have created ways of living that honor both survival and dignity. The courtroom in the House of Trade Unions building carries the weight of history in its ornate walls and high ceilings. Remnants of imperial grandeur now serving the purposes of revolutionary justice. In March of 1938, the third and final Moscow show trial unfolds with the methodical precision of a theatrical performance whose ending has been predetermined, yet whose drama continues to captivate observers both within the Soviet Union and around the world. Imagine yourself seated in the gallery, observing the careful choreography of political justice as it operates in Stalin's Soviet Union. The courtroom itself has been transformed from its original purpose as a meeting hall for trade unions into a stage where the most fundamental questions of loyalty, truth, and survival play out before audiences who understand that they are witnessing something both historically significant and personally dangerous. The defendant's stock holds 21 men whose names had once commanded respect and fear throughout the Soviet Union and beyond. These are not ordinary criminals, but former leaders of the Bolshevik Party, economic planners who had shaped the early years of the Soviet state, and intellectuals whose writings had influenced revolutionary movements around the world. Now they sit in simple wooden chairs, wearing the plain clothes of prisoners, their faces bearing the marks of months of interrogation and preparation for this carefully orchestrated public confession. At the center of this group sits Nikolai Ivanovich Bukharin, once known as the darling of the party, a man whose theoretical writings on socialist economics had earned him Lenin's praise as the most valuable and major theorist of the party. His small stature and intellectual manner seemed almost incongruous in this setting, yet his presence dominates the proceedings with an intensity that reflects both his former status and his current predicament. Bukharin's journey to this defendant's dock represents one of the most complex psychological and political dramas of the Stalin era. Born into a middle-class Moscow family in 1888, he had joined the Bolsheviks as a young student, drawn by their revolutionary promise and their commitment to transforming Russian society according to Marxist principles. His intelligence and dedication had quickly elevated him to positions of significant responsibility, and by the time of the October Revolution, he was recognized as one of the party's most important theoretical voices. The prosecutor, Andrei Vyshinsky, moves through the courtroom with the confidence of a man who understands that his role requires not the discovery of truth, but the articulation of a predetermined narrative. His questions are carefully crafted to elicit not just confessions, but elaborate explanations of conspiracy, betrayal, and counter-revolutionary activity that will justify the broader purges taking place throughout Soviet society. Vyshinsky's theatrical style transforms the courtroom into a stage where political orthodoxy performs its triumph over deviation and opposition. His voice carries the authority of the state as he presents evidence that has been carefully constructed to support conclusions that were reached long before the trial began. Documents are read aloud. Witnesses are called to testify about conversations and meetings that may or may not have taken place as described. And the defendants are invited to confirm their guilt in crimes that serve the narrative requirements of the moment. The charges against Bukharin and his co-defendants encompass a remarkable range of alleged criminal activities: espionage for foreign powers, economic sabotage, conspiracy to assassinate party leaders, and the coordination of anti-Soviet activities with international enemies of the state. These charges are presented not as isolated incidents, but as part of a comprehensive conspiracy that threatens the very survival of the Soviet Union and the global communist movement. Yet, even as he faces these overwhelming accusations, Bukharin demonstrates a complexity that sets him apart from his co-defendants. His responses to Vyshinsky's questions reveal a man who is simultaneously accepting his fate and attempting to preserve some measure of intellectual and personal integrity. He confesses to general political responsibility for opposition activities, while denying specific criminal acts. He accepts the logic of collective guilt, while maintaining his personal innocence of the most serious charges. The psychological dimensions of Bukharin's performance revealed the extraordinary circumstances under which these confessions were obtained. Months of interrogation, the knowledge that his wife and infant son's survival might depend on his cooperation, and the understanding that resistance would serve no purpose beyond personal satisfaction had created conditions under which even the most principled individuals might choose strategic submission over futile defiance. During the long hours of testimony, the courtroom becomes a theater where different versions of recent Soviet history compete for acceptance. Vyshinsky presents a narrative in which the defendants represent everything that threatens socialist construction, foreign influence, bourgeois deviation, and counter-revolutionary conspiracy. The defendants, through their confessions, acknowledge the truth of this narrative while attempting to preserve whatever dignity and principle circumstances allow. Bukharin's testimony reveals his attempt to navigate this impossible situation with a combination of intellectual sophistication and practical realism. When questioned about his theoretical disagreements with party policy, he frames his responses in terms that acknowledge error while avoiding complete capitulation. When pressed about specific criminal activities, he accepts general responsibility, while maintaining that his intentions were never counter-revolutionary. The courtroom audience, composed of party officials, foreign journalists, and carefully selected members of the public, witnesses these proceedings with the understanding, that they are observing not just a trial, but a demonstration of the state's power to extract confession and submission from even its most capable opponents. The trial serves multiple purposes. It provides public justification for the broader purges, it demonstrates the futility of opposition to Stalin's authority, and it creates a historical record that will be used to legitimize future actions against real or perceived enemies. The international journalists present in the courtroom face their own complex calculations as they observe and report on these proceedings. Some recognize the theatrical nature of the confessions, while others accept them as evidence of genuine conspiracy. Their reports will shape international understanding of Soviet justice and political control, creating narratives that will influence diplomatic relations and intellectual debates for decades to come. As the trial progresses through its predetermined phases, the defendants' testimonies reveal the extraordinary human drama underlying these political proceedings. Men who had once wielded significant power now struggle to maintain some measure of dignity while accepting their roles in a performance designed to justify their destruction. Their words carry the weight of desperation disguised as acceptance, calculation disguised as repentance, courage disguised as submission. The evening sessions of the trial, conducted under the harsh, artificial lighting of the courtroom, create an atmosphere of unreality that seems to separate these proceedings from ordinary human experience. The defendants, exhausted from months of preparation and days of testimony, continue to perform their assigned roles, while the machinery of justice grinds toward its inevitable conclusion. Bukharin's final statement to the court represents one of the most complex documents in the history of political confession. Speaking directly to the judges and to the broader Soviet public, he accepts responsibility for his political errors, while simultaneously defending his life's work and his fundamental commitment to socialist ideals. His words operate on multiple levels, satisfying the requirements of confession while preserving a record of his intellectual and moral positions that transcends the immediate circumstances of the trial. In these closing remarks, Bukharin demonstrates the remarkable human capacity to find meaning and dignity even in circumstances of complete powerlessness. He speaks of his love for the party and the Soviet Union, his recognition of his errors, and his acceptance of the court's judgment. Yet his words carry undertones that suggest a more complex relationship to truth and justice than the official proceedings acknowledge. The verdict, when it comes, surprises no one in the courtroom. 18 of the 21 defendants, including Bukharin, are sentenced to death. The sentences are carried out within days, bringing to an end lives that had been dedicated to revolutionary change and socialist construction, but had ultimately fallen victim to the system they had helped create. The trial's conclusion leaves the courtroom empty, except for the court officials and guards who will prepare the space for its next use. The ornate walls that had witnessed this extraordinary drama return to their usual silence, holding within their decorative moldings and classical proportions the memory of proceedings that had transformed individual human beings into symbols of political necessity and historical inevitability. And as you imagine yourself leaving that courtroom, walking out into the Moscow evening, where ordinary people continue their daily routines of work, family, and survival, you might reflect on the terrible gap between the grand historical forces that shape societies and the individual human beings whose lives are consumed by those forces. The trial represents both the ultimate expression of political control and a demonstration of the human spirit's capacity to maintain dignity and meaning even in the face of overwhelming. But the impact of these trials extended far beyond the ornate courtroom where Bukharin and his co-defendants met their fate. In the months and years that followed, the Purges created waves of fear, opportunity, and transformation that touched virtually every aspect of Soviet society, reshaping not just the political landscape, but the most intimate details of how ordinary people understood their relationships to each other, to their work, care, and to the state that governed their lives. Picture yourself in the weeks following the trial's conclusion, when the newspapers carried detailed reports of the convictions and executions, their headlines proclaiming the successful exposure of enemies who had infiltrated the highest levels of party and government. These reports are read in workplaces, discussed in communal kitchens, and absorbed by millions of people who must now reconsider everything they thought they understood about loyalty, safety, and survival in Soviet society. The factory where you work becomes a microcosm of the broader transformation taking place throughout the country. The morning production meeting now includes not just discussions of quotas and targets, but careful reviews of worker attitudes and associations. Your supervisor, the woman whose own position depends on maintaining both productivity and political reliability, faces new pressures to demonstrate her vigilance in identifying potential enemies within her workforce. The personnel files maintained on each worker take on new significance in this transformed environment. Previous notations about political attitudes, family backgrounds, social associations are now reviewed with heightened attention to their implications for security and loyalty. Workers whose files contain even minor questions about their reliability find themselves subject to additional scrutiny, while those with exemplary political records discover new opportunities for advancement and responsibility. Mikhail, who operates the lathe next to yours and whose jokes had somehow managed to find humor without crossing into dangerous territory, becomes noticeably more cautious in his conversations. The easy camaraderie that had characterized your work relationship gives way to a more careful interaction, where every comment is weighed for its potential political implications, and every laugh is measured against the possibility that someone might interpret it as insufficiently serious about the grave threats facing the Soviet state. The suggestion box near the factory entrance receives a sudden influx of contributions from workers, eager to demonstrate their vigilance in identifying problems and their commitment to improving both productivity and security. These suggestions often focus not just on technical improvements, but on observations about colleagues whose behavior might indicate unreliable attitudes or dangerous associations. The box becomes a mechanism through which the atmosphere of suspicion generated by the trials filters down to the most mundane aspects of workplace interaction. Svetlana, whose efficiency had made her a model worker and whose social skills had helped her guide conversations toward safe topics, finds her role evolving in response to the changed environment. Her ability to redirect potentially dangerous discussions becomes even more valuable as workers struggle to maintain human connection while navigating heightened political sensitivities. She becomes an informal teacher, helping her colleagues learn the new vocabulary and behavioral patterns required for survival in the post-trial atmosphere. The lunch break conversations in the factory canteen reflect this transformation in particularly striking ways. Topics that had been considered safely neutral before the trials now carry potential political implications that require careful navigation. Discussions of family matters must avoid any references to relatives who might have questionable associations. Conversations about local conditions must be framed in ways that attribute any problems to technical challenges or foreign sabotage rather than systemic issues. The evening journey home takes you past the local party headquarters, where the increased activity is visible through the lit windows that reveal people working late into the night. These buildings have become centers of intense administrative activity as officials work to identify and investigate the associates, subordinates, and family members of those who have been exposed as enemies. The Purges create a kind of bureaucratic momentum that requires extensive documentation, investigation, and evaluation of thousands of individuals whose only crime may have been proximity to those now declared to be traitors. Your apartment building experiences its own version of this transformation as residents adjust their behavior to reflect the new realities of political surveillance and evaluation. The communal spaces become settings for more careful performances of loyalty and vigilance, where conversations demonstrate not just proper political attitudes, but active commitment to identifying and reporting suspicious activities or associations. The building superintendent, whose responsibilities had always included maintaining detailed knowledge of residents' activities, finds his role taking on new significance as authorities seek information about the associations and behaviors of individuals who might be connected to the broader conspiracy that the trials have revealed. Observations about visitors, schedules, interactions become part of the documentary record that helps officials determine which residents require additional attention or investigation. The communal kitchen becomes a space where the new political realities play out in particularly complex ways. The sharing of food, cooking responsibilities, and cleaning duties continues. But these interactions now occur within a framework of heightened awareness about the political implications of every relationship and conversation. Residents must balance their need for community and mutual support with the understanding that their neighbors might be required to report on their activities and attitudes. Children navigate this transformed environment with particular adaptability that allows young people to absorb new rules and expectations without necessarily understanding their full implications. Their school assignments increasingly focus on identifying and reporting suspicious activities in their neighborhoods, and their playground conversations reflect the political vocabulary they have absorbed from adult discussions and official broadcasts. The bedtime routine in your small room includes new anxieties about the political implications of family conversations and activities. Parents must teach their children not just about proper political attitudes, but about the importance of careful consideration before speaking about family matters outside the home. The line between innocent sharing and potentially dangerous information becomes a constant concern that shapes even the most private family interactions. But the Purges also create unexpected opportunities for advancement and responsibility among those who successfully demonstrate their loyalty and reliability. Workers whose political credentials are beyond question find themselves promoted to positions vacated by those who have been removed as security risks. These promotions carry both material benefits and psychological burdens. As the newly elevated individuals understand that their advancement has come at the cost of their predecessors' destruction. The factory's party representative's quiet presence had always been felt throughout the workplace becomes more visible and active as he works to implement the lessons learned from the trials. His office near the main entrance serves as the center for increased political education activities, designed to help workers understand the nature of the enemies who have been exposed and the vigilance required to prevent future infiltration. These educational sessions follow a careful format designed to reinforce both the legitimacy of the trials and the ongoing need for political vigilance. Workers are taught to recognize the signs of political unreliability, to understand the methods used by enemies to infiltrate and sabotage socialist construction, and to appreciate their own role in maintaining the security of the Soviet state. The sessions create a shared vocabulary for discussing political threats while reinforcing the official interpretation of recent events. The evening news broadcasts take on new significance in this transformed environment as families gather around their radio sets to hear updates on the continuing investigations and the measures being taken to ensure the security of the state. These broadcasts provide not just information, but a framework for understanding how individual experiences should be interpreted within the broader context of the struggle against internal enemies and foreign threats. The announcer's calm, authoritative voice delivers reports about the exposure of additional conspirators, the strengthening of security measures, and the vigilance of ordinary citizens in identifying suspicious activities. These reports create a sense of ongoing drama and importance that transforms daily life into a continuation of the historic struggle between socialism and its enemies. As the weeks pass, the initial shock and uncertainty generated by the trials give way to a new normalcy characterized by heightened political awareness and more careful social interaction. People adapt to the changed environment by developing new skills in political communication and social navigation, learning to express loyalty and vigilance while maintaining the human connections that make life meaningful. The factory floor develops its own rhythm for operating under these new conditions. Workers learn to balance their need for communication and cooperation with the requirements of political safety. They develop new signals and codes that allow them to share necessary information, while avoiding conversations that might be interpreted as politically dangerous. Boris's father's disappearance during the earlier purges had taught him the importance of careful behavior. He finds his survival skills in high demand as colleagues seek his advice on navigating the post-trial environment. His mentorship takes on new dimensions as he helps others understand not just the practical requirements of political safety, but the psychological strategies needed to maintain hope and dignity while living under conditions of heightened surveillance. The suggestion box continues to receive contributions that reflect workers' attempts to demonstrate their vigilance and loyalty while addressing genuine workplace concerns. The art of writing effective suggestions becomes more complex as workers learn to frame their observations in language that shows proper political consciousness while providing useful information about production challenges and security concerns. The evening walk home provides opportunities for observing how the broader community has adapted to the post-trial environment. Conversations on the street are more guarded. Interactions with neighbors are more formal. And the general atmosphere reflects a heightened awareness of the political implications of social behavior. Yet people continue to find ways to maintain community and mutual support, adapting their relationships to accommodate the new realities while preserving the human connections that provide meaning and comfort. And as you settle into your narrow bed in the small room you share with your family, you might reflect on the remarkable human capacity for adaptation and resilience. The trials have created a new environment that requires constant attention to political implications and social safety. Yet, people have found ways to continue living, working, and caring for each other within these constraints. The transformation is real and profound, but it has not eliminated the fundamental human needs for connection, purpose, and dignity that motivate daily life even under the most challenging circumstances. In the months that followed the conclusion of the Moscow trials, Soviet society experienced a kind of collective psychological transformation that went far deeper than changes in behavior or conversation. The Purges had created an environment where the fundamental assumptions about safety, trust, and social relationships were permanently altered, requiring individuals to develop new mental frameworks for understanding their place in the world and their relationships with others. Imagine yourself navigating this transformed psychological landscape where the ground rules of social interaction have shifted in ways that are both subtle and profound. The morning routine that had once provided comfort and predictability now carries undercurrents of anxiety and calculation that require constant mental energy to manage. Each interaction with neighbors, colleagues, and even family members involves a kind of internal assessment that previous generations had never needed to develop. The walk to work takes you through streets filled with people who are all engaged in their own versions of this psychological adaptation. The faces you pass reveal the strain of living under conditions where external conformity must be maintained regardless of internal thoughts or feelings. Yet these same faces also show remarkable resilience as people find ways to preserve their essential humanity while accommodating the demands of political survival. Your workplace becomes a laboratory for observing how different personality types respond to the pressures of the post-purge environment. Some colleagues become notably more withdrawn, limiting their conversations to essential work-related topics and avoiding any discussion that might be interpreted as politically sensitive. Others become almost aggressive in their demonstrations of loyalty, volunteering for additional responsibilities and offering frequent observations about the vigilance required to protect socialist construction from its enemies. Mikhail, whose humor had once lightened the atmosphere around his workstation, develops a new persona that balances his natural sociability with the caution required for political safety. His jokes become more carefully crafted, focusing on safe targets, like weather conditions or mechanical problems, rather than human behavior or social situations. Yet he manages to maintain the essential warmth that had made him a valued colleague, finding ways to express genuine care and concern for his fellow workers within the constraints of political prudence. The lunch break reveals particularly striking examples of psychological adaptation as workers navigate the challenge of maintaining human connection while respecting political boundaries. Conversations develop a kind of layered quality where surface discussions about family activities or weekend plans carry deeper meanings about mutual support and understanding. People learn to communicate reassurance and solidarity through glances, gestures, and carefully chosen words that operate below the level of explicit political commentary. Svetlana's role as an informal social coordinator becomes even more important as she helps her colleagues develop the psychological skills needed for long-term survival in this transformed environment. Her ability to read social situations and guide conversations away from dangerous territory represents a form of emotional intelligence that becomes essential for maintaining workplace community. She teaches by example how to express genuine concern for others while avoiding the kind of detailed discussion that might create political vulnerabilities. The suggestion box near the factory entrance serves not just as a mechanism for communication with management, but as a psychological outlet for workers struggling with the tensions of their situation. Some suggestions reflect genuine attempts to improve working conditions or production efficiency, while others serve as ways for individuals to demonstrate their political consciousness and commitment to collective goals. The act of writing and submitting suggestions becomes a ritual that helps workers feel they are actively contributing to their own safety and the success of the socialist project. The evening journey home provides opportunities for observing how the broader community has developed coping mechanisms for living under conditions of heightened political sensitivity. The conversations overheard on street corners and in shop queues revealed the emergence of new social norms that help people navigate potentially dangerous interactions while maintaining the community connections that provide emotional support and practical assistance. The local party headquarters, visible through its illuminated windows during the evening walk, represents both a source of anxiety and a symbol of the stability that political conformity can provide. The people working late in those offices are engaged in the administrative tasks that maintain political control. But they are also ordinary individuals who face their own pressures and anxieties about demonstrating loyalty and competence in their roles. Your apartment building has developed its own microculture for managing the psychological stresses of living under constant potential surveillance. The communal spaces become theaters where residents perform their commitment to socialist values while negotiating the practical challenges of sharing limited resources and space. The performances are partly conscious and partly unconscious, reflecting both strategic calculation and genuine adaptation to changed circumstances. The communal kitchen serves as a particularly important space for this kind of psychological adaptation, as the intimate nature of food preparation and sharing creates opportunities for both connection and vulnerability. Residents learn to balance their need for community with the awareness that their neighbors might be required to report on their activities or attitudes. The relationships that develop in this environment are characterized by a kind of careful affection that acknowledges both genuine caring and practical limitations. Children observe and absorb these adult adaptations with a particular sensitivity that young people bring to understanding social dynamics. Their play reflects the political vocabulary they hear in adult conversations, and their interactions with each other reveal how the next generation is learning to balance natural curiosity and sociability with the caution required for political safety. Parents must guide this learning process carefully, helping their children develop appropriate social skills without creating anxiety or fear that might interfere with normal development. The bedtime routine includes not just physical preparation for sleep, but psychological preparation for another day of navigating complex social and political demands. Families develop their own rituals for maintaining emotional connection and mutual support while respecting the boundaries that ensure safety. These might include quiet conversations about family history and values, shared activities that reinforce family bonds, or simple expressions of affection that remind family members of their fundamental importance to each other. But the psychological adaptation extends beyond individual and family coping mechanisms to include broader changes in how people understand concepts like truth, loyalty, and moral responsibility. The trials have demonstrated that truth can be a matter of political necessity rather than factual accuracy. That loyalty must be measured by external behavior rather than internal conviction, and that moral responsibility includes not just individual actions but collective compliance with political requirements. These philosophical shifts create internal tensions that individuals must resolve in their own ways. Some people find comfort in complete acceptance of official interpretations, allowing themselves to be convinced that the trials have revealed genuine threats and that their own compliance serves important collective goals. Others maintain private skepticism while performing public conformity, creating a kind of psychological compartmentalization that protects their sense of individual integrity while ensuring their practical survival. The workplace provides numerous examples of how people manage these internal tensions while maintaining productivity and social relationships. Workers develop personal strategies for balancing their private thoughts with their public behavior, finding ways to preserve their sense of individual identity while meeting the expectations of political reliability. Some focus intensely on the technical aspects of their work, finding satisfaction and meaning in competent performance regardless of the political context. Others invest their emotional energy in family relationships and private hobbies that provide fulfillment outside the political sphere. The Factory's Party representative observes these individual adaptations with the understanding that his role requires him to encourage political conformity while maintaining workplace morale and productivity. His interactions with workers reveal his own psychological adaptation to a role that requires him to monitor and evaluate people with whom he must also maintain working relationships. He develops a professional manner that combines political authority with personal approachability, creating an atmosphere that encourages compliance while minimizing the anxiety that might interfere with productive work. The evening news broadcasts serve important psychological functions for people struggling to understand their place in a transformed social order. The calm, authoritative voices of the announcers provide a sense of stability and continuity that helps listeners feel connected to larger purposes and meanings. The content of the broadcasts reinforces the official interpretation of recent events while providing a framework for understanding how individual experiences fit into broader historical patterns. These broadcasts become part of the evening routine for families throughout the Soviet Union, creating a shared experience that helps maintain social cohesion while reinforcing political messages. The ritual of gathering around the radio serves emotional as well as informational purposes, providing families with a sense of participation in important events and a connection to the broader community of Soviet citizens. The weeks and months following the trials reveal the remarkable human capacity for psychological adaptation and resilience. People develop new skills for managing anxiety, uncertainty, and social complexity while maintaining their commitment to family, work, and community. The adaptations are not always comfortable or complete, but they demonstrate the fundamental human drive to find meaning and purpose even under the most challenging circumstances. The suggestion box continues to serve as both a practical communication mechanism and a psychological outlet for workers seeking to demonstrate their engagement with collective goals while addressing personal concerns about workplace conditions and social relationships. The suggestions reflect the complex balance between individual needs and political requirements that characterizes daily life in the post-trial environment. Boris, whose early experience with political loss had taught him survival skills that others now need, finds himself serving as an informal counselor and mentor for colleagues struggling with anxiety about their political safety. His advice focuses not just on practical strategies for avoiding political problems, but on psychological techniques for maintaining emotional stability and personal dignity while living under conditions of heightened surveillance and control. Evening Walk Home provides opportunities for reflecting on the day's social interactions and planning for future challenges. The streets, filled with people engaged in their own psychological adaptations, create a sense of shared experience that helps individuals feel less isolated in their struggles. The community of adaptation becomes a source of strength and resilience that helps people maintain hope and purpose despite the constraints they face. And as you settle into sleep in your small room, listening to the familiar sounds of your neighbors engaged in their own evening routines, you might marvel at the complex psychological architecture that people have constructed to protect their essential humanity. While navigating the demands of political survival, the trials have transformed society in profound ways, but they have not eliminated the fundamental human capacities for love, hope, and mutual support that provide the foundation for meaningful existence even under the most restrictive circumstances. The psychology of survival reveals itself not just in individual adaptations, but in collective patterns of behavior that help entire communities maintain their social fabric while accommodating political requirements. These patterns represent neither complete resistance nor total submission, but rather a complex form of adaptation that preserves what is most essential while accepting what cannot be changed. In this balance between accommodation and preservation, ordinary people find ways to honor both survival and dignity in circumstances that challenge both. Deep within the concrete walls of government buildings, scattered across Moscow, in basements that rarely see natural light, and in filing cabinets that stretch from floor to ceiling, lie the documentary remains of one of history's most extensive systems of forced labor and political control. These archives contain not just the records of individual cases and sentences, but the architectural blueprints, administrative memos, and bureaucratic correspondence that reveal how the Gulag system was conceived, planned, and implemented with the methodical precision of any other major infrastructure project. Picture yourself ascending into one of these archive facilities, your footsteps echoing in corridors lined with metal shelving that holds millions of documents. The air carries the distinctive scent of aging paper and bureaucratic ink, the accumulated residue of decades of administrative activity that transformed human suffering into statistical reports and construction projects into tools of political control. The fluorescent lighting casts harsh shadows that seem appropriate to the contents of these carefully organized files. The blueprints themselves tell a story of systematic planning that rivals any major industrial or urban development project of the Soviet era, drawn with the same technical precision used for factories, housing projects, and transportation systems. These documents reveal how the camps were designed to maximize both economic productivity and political control. The layout of barracks, work areas, administrative buildings, and security installations reflects careful consideration of efficiency, cost-effectiveness, and the psychological impact of environmental design on prisoner behavior and guard effectiveness. 1. Particularly detailed set of plans, stamped with the official seals of various government departments and dated from the early 1930s, shows the proposed layout for a timber harvesting camp in the Arkhangelsk region. The drawings include precise measurements for prisoner housing, calculations for the optimal number of inmates per barracks, and detailed specifications for the workshop areas where logs would be processed into lumber for shipment to construction projects throughout the Soviet Union. The administrative correspondence surrounding these plans reveals the bureaucratic language through which human lives were reduced to economic variables and construction challenges. Letters between camp administrators, regional officials, and central planners discuss prisoner populations with the same vocabulary used for discussing livestock or machinery. Memos calculate the caloric requirements for maintaining adequate work capacity while minimizing food costs. Reports evaluate the productivity rates achievable under different housing conditions and work schedules. The archives contain extensive files devoted to what the bureaucrats called camp economics, detailed studies of how to maximize the economic value of forced labor while maintaining the political functions that the camps served within the broader Soviet system. These studies include analyses of different types of work that could be performed by prisoners with varying levels of education and physical capacity, calculations of transportation costs for moving prisoners to different types of work sites, and evaluations of the economic benefits of different approaches to camp administration and prisoner management. The medical files represent some of the most chilling documents in these collections, not because they document deliberate cruelty, but because they reveal how human suffering was systematized and rationalized through bureaucratic procedure. Reports from camp medical officers discuss mortality rates with the detached precision of industrial accident statistics, analyzing the causes of death and the factors that influence prisoner health without apparent recognition of the human cost of the policies they were implementing. These medical reports often focus on practical questions of camp management rather than humanitarian concerns. How many calories were required to maintain prisoners at different levels of work capacity? What medical interventions were cost-effective for maintaining labor productivity? How could camp administrators reduce mortality rates sufficiently to meet production targets while minimizing expenditures on medical care and food supplies? The construction documents reveal the physical infrastructure required to support the Gulag system, from the specialized railroad cars designed for prisoner transport to the prefabricated building components shipped to remote locations for rapid camp construction. These materials were often developed by the same engineers and manufactured in the same facilities that produced housing for free citizens. creating a strange parallel between the infrastructure of oppression and the infrastructure of normal Soviet life. The transportation files contain detailed route maps and scheduling documents that show how prisoners were moved from urban arrest points to distant camp locations with the same logistical precision applied to any other cargo. The maps mark railway stations, transfer points, temporary holding facilities, creating a transportation network that spanned the entire Soviet Union and could efficiently move thousands of people from areas where they were no longer wanted to regions where their labor was needed for industrial development or resource extraction. The personnel files for camp administrators and guards revealed the bureaucratic systems used to recruit, train, and manage the staff required to operate this vast network of facilities. These documents show how ordinary citizens were drawn into roles that required them to manage and control their fellow citizens under conditions of extreme hardship and systematic dehumanization. The training materials provide insight into how the system attempted to prepare staff for the psychological challenges of their work while maintaining the ideological framework that justified their activities. The economic reports filed by camp administrators provide a window into how the Gulag functioned as an integral part of the Soviet planned economy, contributing to major infrastructure projects, resource extraction operations, and industrial development programs. These reports detail the output of timber, minerals, manufactured goods, and construction work performed by prisoner labor, revealing the economic calculations that made the camps profitable from the perspective of central planners, even as they consumed enormous human and social resources. The correspondence between camp administrators and their supervisors in Moscow reveals the constant pressure to meet production targets while maintaining security and political compliance. These letters discuss the practical challenges of managing large prisoner populations in harsh environments with limited resources, the difficulties of maintaining adequate productivity among demoralized workers, and the constant tension between economic efficiency and political control. The archival evidence also documents bureaucratic innovations developed to manage the massive administrative challenges created by the Gulag system. Special forms were designed for different types of prisoner classifications. Standardized procedures were established for camp inspections and reporting, and elaborate filing systems were created to track individual prisoners as they moved through the system. The administrative infrastructure required to support the camps created its own employment opportunities for clerks, typists, accountants, and managers who made careers from the bureaucracy of repression. The budget documents reveal the enormous financial resources devoted to constructing and maintaining the camp system. From the initial capital investments in remote infrastructure to the ongoing operational costs of housing, feeding, and guarding millions of prisoners. These financial records show how the camps were integrated into the broader Soviet budget process, with their costs and revenues treated as legitimate components of national economic planning. The legal files contained the statutory frameworks and administrative regulations that provided the formal justification for the camp system, showing how existing legal concepts were extended and modified to accommodate the practical requirements of mass imprisonment and forced labor. These documents revealed the careful attention given to maintaining the appearance of legal procedure, even when applying it to obviously political processes of arrest, conviction, and sentence. But the story preserved in those Moscow archives represents only one layer of historical evidence about the Gulag system and its impact on Soviet society, scattered across the vast expanse of the former Soviet Union, in forests that have reclaimed abandoned clearings in tundra where concrete foundations still mark the sites of vanished buildings, and in remote valleys where rusting machinery tells its own story of forced labor and industrial ambition. The physical remains of the camp system continue to yield their secrets to researchers, archaeologists, and local residents who stumble upon fragments of a hidden history. Picture yourself traveling to one of these sites, perhaps in the Kolyma region of far northeastern Russia, where the summer's brief thaw reveals artifacts that have been preserved in permafrost for decades. The landscape itself tells the story of massive human intervention in one of the world's most hostile environments, where prisoners were brought to extract gold and build infrastructure under conditions that claimed thousands of lives each winter. The remnants of camp structures emerged from the thawing ground like archaeological evidence of a lost civilization. Concrete foundations mark the locations of administrative buildings, barracks, and workshops that once housed thousands of prisoners and their guards. The foundations are cracked and partially destroyed by decades of freeze-thaw cycles, but their layout still reveals the careful planning that went into designing facilities that could function effectively while maintaining security and control over large prisoner populations. Scattered around these foundations, patient searchers can still find fragments of daily life that humanize the statistics and administrative records stored in distant archives. Pieces of pottery from the camp mess halls, buttons from prison uniforms, fragments of homemade tools crafted by prisoners for specialized work tasks, personal items that somehow survived the systematic confiscation of private property that accompanied imprisonment in the Gulag system, the industrial machinery abandoned at these sites tells its own story of the economic ambitions that drove the expansion of forced labor into these remote regions. Rusting, earth-moving equipment, the remains of processing facilities for mineral extraction, Tate, and the twisted metal fragments of transportation infrastructure revealed the scale of the industrial projects that prisoners were forced to complete under conditions that would challenge even well-equipped and voluntary workers. Local residents in communities near former campsites often possessed their own collections of artifacts and stories passed down through families who lived in the area during the camp operations. These local museums and private collections contain items that never made their way into official archives. Photographs taken secretly by guards or administrators, personal letters that somehow escaped confiscation, and physical objects that provide tangible connections to the human experiences that the bureaucratic records can only describe in statistical terms. The archaeological investigation of these sites reveals layers of history that document not just the camp operations, but their integration into local economies and communities. The camps required extensive support infrastructure, from transportation networks to supply chains that connected remote locations to urban centers. Local communities were often transformed by the presence of camps, as free workers were brought in to support camp operations, and local economies were restructured around the economic activity generated by forced labor. The discovery of prisoner cemeteries at many of these sites provides some of the most poignant evidence of the human cost of the Gulag system. These burial grounds, often unmarked and sometimes hidden, contain the remains of individuals who died far from their homes and families under conditions that made dignified burial impossible. The archaeological investigation of these sites requires careful attention to both scientific methodology and human dignity, as researchers work to document the evidence while respecting the memory of those who suffered and died in these remote locations. The physical evidence found at these sites often contradicts or complicates the official records maintained in central archives. While administrative documents might report efficient operations and acceptable mortality rates, the archaeological evidence frequently reveals construction projects that were never completed, facilities that were abandoned due to impractical planning, living conditions that were even more harsh than official reports acknowledged. The environmental impact of camp operations remains visible decades after their closure, as the harsh conditions and massive scale of some projects left permanent changes to local ecosystems. Clear-cut forests, altered drainage patterns, and contaminated soil provide evidence of industrial activities that prioritized immediate production goals over long-term environmental sustainability. These environmental traces serve as another form of historical documentation, revealing the broader impact of forced labor on the landscapes where it was employed. The transportation infrastructure built to support the camps represents some of the most dramatic archaeological evidence of the system's scope and ambition. Railroad lines built by prisoner labor to reach remote mining sites. Roads constructed through previously inaccessible terrain, and port facilities built to ship extracted resources to processing centers throughout the Soviet Union. Much of this infrastructure was built under conditions that made normal engineering standards impossible to maintain, resulting in construction that often failed to survive long after the camps that built it were closed. The discovery of escape routes and hiding places used by prisoners provides evidence of resistance and survival strategies that rarely appear in official records. These might include caves or shelters where escaped prisoners sought refuge, routes through wilderness areas that avoided guard posts and checkpoints, or evidence of contact between prisoners and local populations, who sometimes provided assistance, despite the severe penalties for helping escapees. The archaeological investigation of campsites also reveals the cultural and social activities that prisoners developed to maintain their humanity under dehumanizing conditions. Evidence of clandestine religious observances, secret schools where prisoners shared knowledge and skills, and artistic activities that provided psychological escape from the harsh realities of camp life. These discoveries provide insight into the remarkable human capacity to create meaning and community. Even under the most oppressive circumstances, the preservation of prisoner artwork and craftwork at some sites provides particularly powerful evidence of individual creativity and resistance. Carved objects made from available materials, drawings created with improvised tools, and written materials hidden in walls or buried for potential future discovery. These items represent attempts by prisoners to leave records of their experiences and to assert their individual identity against a system designed to reduce them to anonymous units of labor. The investigation of guard facilities and administrative buildings reveals the living conditions and working environment of the people who administered the camp system. These findings provide insight into how ordinary citizens adapted to roles that required them to oversee systematic oppression while maintaining their own sense of normalcy and purpose. The physical evidence of guard quarters, recreational facilities, and administrative offices shows how the system attempted to create acceptable working conditions for staff while maintaining the harsh discipline applied to prisoners. Beyond the official archives and physical remains of the Gulag system lies another layer of historical evidence that reveals how Soviet society developed elaborate networks of hidden communication, secret cultural practices, and underground economies that allowed people to maintain elements of individual identity and community connection despite living under total state control. This secret culture operated parallel to official Soviet society, creating spaces where different forms of human expression and social organization could survive and sometimes flourish. Picture yourself as an observer of these hidden networks, moving through Soviet society with the awareness that beneath every official interaction lies a more complex system of relationships, communications, and cultural practices that rarely appear in government records or public documentation. This underground culture required its own forms of literacy, its own social skills, and its own moral frameworks for navigating the gap between public conformity and private authenticity. The development of coded language represents one of the most sophisticated aspects of this hidden culture, as people learned to communicate complex ideas and sensitive information through conversations that appeared completely innocent to outside observers. These linguistic codes operated at multiple levels, from simple euphemisms that disguise political commentary as discussions of weather or conditions to elaborate metaphorical systems that could convey detailed information about political developments, economic conditions, or personal circumstances in the workplace. These coded communications allowed workers to share information about management decisions, policy changes, and individual situations that might affect their colleagues' safety or opportunities. The codes operated through subtle changes in standard phrases, the strategic use of certain words or expressions, and nonverbal signals that could convey warnings, reassurances, or invitations to more detailed private conversations. The secret culture also encompassed elaborate systems for sharing goods, services, and information that operated outside official distribution channels. These underground economies allowed people to obtain items that were unavailable through state stores, to access services that weren't provided by government agencies, and to exchange favors that enhanced their quality of life and security. The networks required careful cultivation of relationships, precise understanding of reciprocal obligations, and sophisticated risk assessment to avoid detection by authorities. Family networks served as particularly important foundations for these underground systems, as blood relationships provided relatively secure channels for communication and mutual assistance. Extended families developed their own internal economies for sharing resources, information, and opportunities, creating support systems that could help individual members navigate political dangers or economic difficulties. These family networks often extended beyond immediate relatives to include close friends, who were treated as honorary family members and granted similar lobbyists of trust and obligation. Religious communities maintained their own forms of underground culture, preserving spiritual practices and social connections that had been officially abolished or severely restricted by Soviet authorities. These communities developed elaborate security procedures for conducting religious services, maintaining religious education, and preserving religious texts and artifacts. The underground religious culture required its own leadership structures, communication systems, and methods for recruiting new members while protecting existing participants from persecution. Intellectual networks create their own underground culture for sharing ideas, literature, and artistic works that couldn't be published or performed through official channels. These networks operated through carefully cultivated relationships between writers, artists, scientists, and other intellectuals who shared manuscripts, organized private readings or performances, and maintained discussions about topics that were considered politically sensitive or ideologically inappropriate. The Samstat system represents perhaps the most famous example of underground cultural activity, as writers and readers developed elaborate networks for producing, distributing, and preserving literature that challenged or contradicted official Soviet cultural policies. The system required not just brave writers willing to risk persecution for their work, but also typists willing to reproduce manuscripts, distributors willing to share them with other readers, and readers willing to accept the risks associated with possessing forbidden literature. The underground culture also included elaborate systems for obtaining and sharing information about current events, both domestic and international, that provided alternatives to official media coverage. These information networks operated through personal relationships with people who had access to foreign broadcasts, official documents, or insider knowledge about government activities. The information circulated through carefully maintained chains of trusted individuals who could verify its accuracy and assess its political implications. Youth culture developed its own forms of underground expression that allowed young people to explore ideas and identities that differed from official Soviet youth organizations and educational programs. These underground youth cultures included music, fashion, and social activities that drew inspiration from foreign sources and challenged official aesthetic and ideological standards. The youth networks required particular sophistication in avoiding detection, as young people faced severe consequences for activities that suggested political unreliability or foreign influence. The underground culture of professional communities allowed people with specialized knowledge and skills to maintain standards and practices that might conflict with official policies or ideological requirements. Medical professionals, for example, sometimes developed informal networks for sharing medical information and techniques that weren't officially approved, while engineers and scientists maintained connections that allowed them to pursue research interests that didn't align with state priorities. Prison and camp. Communities developed their own highly sophisticated underground cultures that allowed inmates to maintain dignity, share resources, and preserve hope under conditions of extreme hardship and systematic dehumanization. These cultures included elaborate codes for communicating with the outside world, systems for organizing mutual assistance and protection, and methods for preserving and sharing knowledge that might be useful for survival or future opportunities. The underground culture also encompassed elaborate systems for preserving memory and historical evidence might otherwise be lost or destroyed by official censorship and control. Individuals and families developed methods for hiding documents, photographs, and personal artifacts that documented experiences or events that contradicted official historical narratives. These preservation efforts required long-term planning and careful assessment of risks and opportunities for protecting materials that might be valuable for future historians or family members. Cultural communities, organized around shared ethnic, linguistic, or regional identities, maintained underground networks that preserved traditions, languages, and practices that were discouraged or prohibited by official Soviet nationality policies. These networks required careful balance between cultural preservation and political safety, as activities that seemed to promote non-Russian identity or challenge Soviet ideology could result in severe persecution. High above the crowded communal apartments where ordinary Soviet citizens shared kitchens and counted calories, a different world existed within the same revolutionary society, in the spacious apartments reserved for party officials and their families, behind doors guarded by building superintendents who understood the importance of discretion, lived the men and women whose decisions shaped the daily experiences of Khan. Millions, while their own lives unfolded according to very different rules and possibilities. Picture yourself ascending the carpeted staircase of a building on one of Moscow's most prestigious streets, where the apartments occupy entire floors, and the hallways are decorated with artwork that would never appear in ordinary housing. The very architecture of these buildings suggests a different relationship to space, its privacy, and material comfort than the cramped quarters where most Soviet citizens conducted their family lives and personal relationships. The apartment of a senior party commissar reveals a world of contradictions that illuminate the gap between ideological rhetoric and practical reality in Stalin's Soviet Union. The living room, spacious enough to host formal receptions and political meetings, is furnished with pieces that blend Soviet-made furniture with carefully selected items that suggest international sophistication and cultural refinement. The French curtains that frame the large windows looking out onto the tree-lined street below represent not just luxury, but a particular kind of cultural statement about the occupant's place in the world, the commissar himself. Viktor Mikhailovich Petrov exemplifies the complex psychology of the Soviet elite during the Stalin era. Born to a working-class family in provincial Russia, he had joined the Bolshevik Party as a young man and risen through the ranks through a combination of political acumen, ideological dedication, and the particular skills required for navigating the dangerous currents of Soviet politics during the Purges and their aftermath. His daily routine begins in a bedroom that offers a stark contrast to the shared sleeping spaces that characterize life for ordinary Soviet families. The bed is large enough for two people to sleep comfortably without touching, covered with linen that is changed regularly by domestic staff who understand the importance of maintaining the material conditions that support their employer's political effectiveness. The bedroom contains a radio that receives international broadcasts, allowing the commissar to monitor foreign coverage of Soviet affairs and stay informed about international developments that might affect his work. The morning preparation ritual includes access to luxury goods that are simply unavailable to ordinary citizens. Imported soap, high-quality clothing, personal care items that allow the commissar to maintain the physical appearance expected of someone in his position. His suits are tailored by craftsmen who work exclusively for the party elite, creating clothing that projects authority and sophistication while remaining appropriately modest by the standards of tent sides. Soviet ideology. The private dining room where the commissar takes his breakfast reveals perhaps the most striking contrast with ordinary Soviet life. The table is set with china and silverware that suggest refinement and prosperity, while the menu includes items that ordinary citizens encounter only on special holidays, if at all. Fresh fruit, high-quality bread, real butter, cake, and coffee prepared from imported beans create a morning meal that bears little resemblance to the careful rationing that characterizes food consumption for the vast majority of the population. Yet, even as he enjoys these material privileges, the commissar remains acutely aware of the political calculations that determine his continued access to them. His position in the party hierarchy requires constant attention to the shifting alliances and policy changes that could elevate him to even greater authority or cast him into disgrace and potential persecution. The luxury that surrounds him serves not just personal comfort, but political necessity, as his ability to host influential guests and maintain appropriate appearances directly affects his effectiveness in the roles that justify his privileged status. The commissar's wife, Lena Sarjevna, navigates her own complex relationship to the privileges and constraints of elite Soviet life. Her wardrobe includes clothing that demonstrates sophisticated taste and access to high-quality materials. Yet every outfit must be carefully chosen to project appropriate political attitudes while maintaining the personal style that marks her as someone of importance and refinement. Her social activities include involvement with cultural organizations and charitable efforts that demonstrate proper Soviet values while providing opportunities for the kind of networking that supports her husband's career. Their children attend special schools reserved for the children of party officials, where the curriculum includes not just standard Soviet education, but additional languages, cultural activities, and academic opportunities that prepare them for potential leadership roles in the next generation. These schools create a kind of parallel educational system that ensures the reproduction of elite status while maintaining the ideological framework that justifies the party's authority over Soviet society. The apartment's library reveals the commissar's access to books and periodicals that are unavailable to ordinary readers, including foreign publications that provide alternative perspectives on international affairs and Soviet policies. The collection includes works by foreign authors, historical texts that present complex views of Russian and Soviet development, and theoretical works that require sophisticated understanding of political and economic concepts that aren't part of general public education. The commissar's working day begins with briefings from subordinates who provide detailed reports on conditions in the regions and organizations under his authority. These reports often present information that differs significantly from the official statistics and public presentations that shape general understanding of Soviet progress and achievements. The commissar must balance his knowledge of actual conditions with his responsibility to support official narratives and policy directives. The telephone in the commissar's private office connects him to a network of similarly positioned officials throughout the Soviet Union and two higher-level authorities. His decisions shape national policy. These communications operate according to carefully understood protocols that allow for the discussion of sensitive information while maintaining appropriate political discretion. The conversations reveal the complex negotiations and compromises that transform ideological directives into practical policies and programs. During the afternoon, Commissar might meet with foreign visitors, journalists, or dignitaries whose presence in Moscow provides opportunities to shape international understanding of Soviet achievements and policies. These meetings take place in reception rooms that are carefully designed to project appropriate messages about Soviet prosperity and cultural sophistication while maintaining ideological correctness in their decoration and atmosphere. The commissars' evening entertainment might include attendance at cultural events that are closed to general public participation, private performances by renowned artists, screenings of foreign films that haven't been approved for general distribution, or social gatherings that bring together the political and cultural elite in settings that allow for more relaxed discussion of policy, questions, and personal relationships. Dinner parties hosted in the commissar's apartment revealed the social world of the Soviet elite, where political alliances are cultivated and maintained through personal relationships that operate parallel to official channels. The guests include other party officials, cultural figures who support approved artistic policies, and international visitors whose presence demonstrates the Soviet Union's engagement with global intellectual and political movements. Beyond the privileged apartment in central Moscow, the commissar's world extends to include access to a dacha in the countryside, where the pace of life slows to accommodate different forms of work and relaxation that provide respite from the intense pressures of political responsibility, while creating opportunities for the kind of informal relationship building that oils the machinery of Soviet governance and administration. Picture yourself traveling with the commissar's family on one of their weekend retreats to this country residence, located in a pine forest about an hour's drive from Moscow. The journey itself reveals another layer of elite privilege, as the family travels in a government vehicle driven by a chauffeur who understands the importance of discretion about his passengers' conversations and destinations. The car is well maintained and comfortable, equipped with amenities that make the trip pleasant rather than merely functional. The dacha compound includes not just the main residence, but also guest cottages, staff quarters, and recreational facilities that allow for the kind of extended entertaining that supports the commissar's political and social obligations. The main building combines rustic charm with modern conveniences, creating an environment that suggests both connection to Russian cultural traditions and access to contemporary luxury. The architecture reflects careful planning to provide privacy for sensitive conversations, while accommodating the social activities that make dachas valuable tools for political networking. The commissar's weekend routine at the dacha reveals a different aspect of elite Soviet life, where the formal constraints of official responsibilities give way to more relaxed interactions that nonetheless serve important political functions. The morning might begin with a walk through the forest paths that surround the property, providing opportunities for private conversations with guests, family members that would be impossible in more formal settings. The dacha's kitchen staff, led by Anna Petrovna, a woman whose family has served wealthy Russian families for 3 generations, represents another hidden layer of Soviet society. Anna's position requires her to navigate the complex transition from serving pre-revolutionary aristocrats to serving Soviet officials, adapting her skills and discretion to the needs of a very different kind of elite while maintaining the professional standards that make her services valuable. Anna's daily routine begins before dawn, as she prepares for meals that must accommodate both the commissar's family's preferences and the dietary requirements and cultural expectations of various guests, who might include other Soviet officials, foreign dignitaries, or cultural figures, whose presence at the dacha reflects the commissar's position in Moscow's political and social hierarchy. Her work requires not just culinary skill, but sophisticated understanding of social dynamics and political sensitivities. The dacha's guest list for any particular weekend reveals the complex network of relationships that sustain the commissar's political effectiveness. The guests might include other party officials with whom he must coordinate policy implementation, cultural figures whose support legitimizes party cultural policies, and family friends whose children attend the same schools, and whose wives participate in the same social organizations that create the community infrastructure supporting elite Soviet families. The evening conversations on the Docha's large veranda create opportunities for the kind of informal discussion that allows political colleagues to explore policy questions, share assessments of current developments, and build the personal relationships that facilitate cooperation and compromise in official settings. These conversations operate according to understood protocols that allow participants to speak more frankly than would be appropriate in formal meetings while maintaining appropriate political boundaries. Anna observes these interactions from her position as invisible service provider, gaining insights into political dynamics and policy discussions that provide her with unusual understanding of how Soviet governance actually operates at the highest levels. Her discretion about what she overhears is essential not just for maintaining her employment, but for protecting the political effectiveness of the officials she serves. The commissar's wife, Lena Sargevna, uses the dacha as a setting for her own political and social activities, hosting gatherings for the wives of other officials and cultural figures that serve important functions in maintaining the social networks that support their husbands' careers. These women's gatherings might focus on charitable activities, cultural projects, educational initiatives, but they also provide opportunities for sharing information and building alliances that influence policy, development, and political decision-making. The children's activities at the dacha include interactions with the children of other elite families, creating social relationships that will influence their future opportunities and responsibilities. These childhood friendships often develop into lifelong connections that shape career paths and political alliances, creating continuity in Soviet leadership that operates parallel to official party structures and procedures. Anna's own family situation reveals another dimension of the hidden hierarchies that exist within Soviet society. Her husband works as a mechanic at a government motor pool, maintaining the vehicles used by various officials and their families. Her children attend regular Soviet schools, but benefit from connections and opportunities that result from their parents' positions within elite households. The family occupies a social position that is neither ordinary working class nor officially privileged, creating unique challenges and opportunities for navigating Soviet social structures. The Dacha's library contains books and periodicals that reflect both the commissar's personal interests and his professional responsibilities, including foreign publications that provide key information about international developments and theoretical works that inform policy discussions. Anna has learned to read well enough to understand some of these materials, gaining education that supplements her practical experience and enhances her understanding of the political world she serves. The boundaries between elite and ordinary life in Stalin's Soviet Union were not as impermeable as they might appear from either perspective alone. In the spaces where these different worlds intersected in government offices where officials met with citizens, in cultural institutions where political authorities encountered artists and intellectuals, and in the administrative machinery that translated policy decisions into daily reality for millions of people. The contrasts and connections between privilege and constraint created complex human dramas that revealed the fundamental tensions within Soviet society. Picture yourself in the reception area of a regional party headquarters where ordinary citizens wait for appointments with officials whose decisions will affect their housing assignments, employment opportunities, or family situations. The waiting room itself tells a story about the relationship between authority and supplication in Soviet society, with its formal furniture, official portraits, and carefully maintained atmosphere of bureaucratic efficiency that both impresses visitors with the importance of the institution and reminds them of their subordinate position in these interactions. The citizens who wait in this reception area represent a cross-section of Soviet society. Factory workers seeking resolution of workplace disputes, mothers requesting better housing for their families, veterans hoping for improved medical care, and students applying for educational opportunities that might transform their futures. Their clothing, posture, and conversation revealed the careful preparation that such meetings require. Ordinary people must navigate the complex protocols of official interaction while presenting their cases in ways that demonstrate proper political consciousness and respect for authority. The commissar himself moves between these different worlds with the practiced ease of someone who has learned to adjust his demeanor, vocabulary, and attention level to accommodate the varying requirements of his different relationships and responsibilities. His interaction with ordinary citizens seeking his assistance reveals both a genuine concern for their welfare and careful calculation of the political implications of his decisions. Every choice about which cases to prioritize, which problems to address, and which citizens to accommodate carries consequences that extend far beyond the immediate satisfaction of individual requests. Anna Petrovna, a Dacha cook, whose weekend observations have provided her with unusual insight into elite political culture, occasionally finds herself in situations where her two worlds intersect in unexpected ways. Her shopping trips to Moscow markets bring her into contact with ordinary citizens who recognize her association with powerful officials, creating interactions that are both ordinary commercial transactions and complex negotiations of social status and political access. When Anna encounters her sister, Masha, who works in a textile factory and lives in a communal apartment with her husband and 3 children, their conversation reveals the gap between their daily experiences while demonstrating the family ties that bridge different levels of Soviet society. Matia's questions about Anna's work are carefully phrased to avoid seeming too curious about official business, while Anna's responses provide just enough information to maintain its family connection without violating the discretion that her position requires. The commissar's children, educated in elite schools and raised with access to privileges that most of their generation cannot imagine, nonetheless encounter ordinary Soviet society through their participation in youth organizations, cultural activities, and educational programs that bring together young people from different social backgrounds. These interactions create opportunities for friendships that cross class boundaries while revealing the subtle differences in perspective, opportunity, and expectation that distinguish elite youth from their contemporaries. The evening cultural events that bring together political officials, artists, intellectuals, and carefully selected members of the general public create, perhaps, the most complex intersections between different levels of Soviet society. A theatrical performance or musical concert attended by the commissar and his family alongside factory workers and their families creates a shared experience that both demonstrates egalitarian ideals of Soviet culture and reveals the practical differences in how different groups experience and interpret the same artistic work. During intermission at such events, the conversations in the lobby revealed the careful social choreography required when people from different levels of Soviet society interact in public settings. The commissar might engage in brief conversations with ordinary citizens who recognize him, exchanges that allow him to demonstrate accessibility and concern for common people while maintaining the dignity and authority that his position requires. These interactions are observed by other officials, ordinary citizens, and cultural figures who each interpret them according to their own understanding of political and social dynamics. Anna's presence at such events, accompanying the commissar's family in her role as trusted household manager, provides her with opportunities to observe these social interactions from a unique perspective. Her position allows her to move between different groups without being fully part of any of them, creating a kind of social invisibility that permits unusual insight into how different levels of Soviet society understand and relate to each other. The commissar's office appointments with individual citizens seeking assistance revealed the human dimension of political authority in Soviet society. Its personal stories of hardship, ambition, and family struggle intersect with policy requirements, resource limitations, and political calculations. Each meeting requires the commissar to balance his genuine desire to help individual citizens with his obligation to maintain systemic consistency and his need to preserve his own political effectiveness for future challenges. A typical appointment might involve a war veteran seeking improved housing for his family, a situation that requires the commissar to consider not just the individual's service and need, but also the broader housing shortage, the political implications of different allocation decisions, and the precedent that his choice might establish for future similar cases. The veteran's presentation of his case reveals his understanding of the political vocabulary required for effective supplication, while the commissar's response demonstrates his skill at providing reassurance and hope while avoiding commitments that he might not be able to fulfill. And so, as our journey through Stalin's Soviet Union draws to a gentle close, we find ourselves returning to the simple truth that has guided us throughout this long night's exploration, that beneath the grand narratives of history, beneath the political systems and ideological struggles that captured the attention of historians and philosophers, lies the enduring reality of ordinary people, living ordinary days with extraordinary courage and resilience. The alarm clock that awakens the factory worker in her communal apartment, the careful conversations in bread queues where neighbors share information through coded glances and whispered words, the evening routines of families who transform cramped spaces into homes filled with love and hope. These daily rhythms reveal the fundamental human capacity to create meaning and dignity even under circumstances that seem designed to eliminate both. We have walked together through the shadowed corridors of surveillance and control, where every interaction carried political weight and every conversation required careful calculation of safety and authenticity. Yet, in those same spaces, we discovered the remarkable human ability to develop new forms of communication and community that preserved essential connections while respecting the boundaries necessary for survival. The workplace friendships that operated through subtle signals and shared silences, the family bonds that strengthened under pressure, and the neighborhood networks that provided mutual support despite constant monitoring, all demonstrated the persistence of human solidarity in even the most atomized and controlled societies. The courtroom, where Bukharin and his co-defendants performed their final roles in the theater of revolutionary justice, revealed both the awesome power of the state to extract confession and submission from its most capable opponents, and the complex psychology of individuals who found ways to maintain dignity and principle, even while accepting their destruction. In their careful words and measured responses, we glimpsed the eternal human struggle to preserve individual integrity within systems that demand complete conformity. And we saw how even the most overwhelming political pressure cannot entirely eliminate the capacity for moral choice and personal authenticity. The archives and archaeological sites that preserve evidence of the Gulag system told us stories that go beyond statistics and administrative procedures to reveal the human experiences that those documents could only hint at in the blueprints and bureaucratic memos. We saw how ordinary institutional processes could be used to implement extraordinary cruelty, while in the physical remained scattered across the landscape. We found traces of individual resistance and community that no amount of systematic oppression could entirely erase. The underground networks and secret cultures that flourished parallel to official Soviet society demonstrated the irrepressible human drive to create authentic relationships and meaningful expression regardless of political constraints. The coded languages, hidden economies, and clandestine cultural activities that we explored revealed how people found ways to preserve their essential humanity while navigating the demands of political survival, creating parallel worlds of genuine connection and creative expression that operated beneath the surface of visual conformity. The elite world of party commissars and their families, with its French curtains and weekend dachas, its access to luxury goods and international perspectives revealed the complex contradictions inherent in revolutionary societies that promise equality while creating new forms of hierarchy and privilege. Yet even in these privileged spaces, we found human beings struggling with the same fundamental questions of authenticity, relationship, and moral responsibility that challenged ordinary citizens, albeit under very different circumstances and with very different stakes. The intersections between these different worlds. The moments when ordinary citizens encountered party officials, when domestic servants observed political discussions, when elite children played with working class neighbors provided glimpses of the shared humanity that persisted across all social boundaries and political divisions. In these encounters, we saw how personal relationships could both reinforce and subvert official hierarchies, creating spaces where common human concerns could briefly transcend the political categories that otherwise defined social interaction. Throughout this journey, we've been guided by the understanding that historical truth lies not just in political events and policy decisions, but in the daily experiences of people lived within the systems that historians analyze and evaluate, the morning routines and evening conversations, the workplace relationships and family dynamics, the small acts of kindness and quiet gestures of resistance that filled the hours. Between the dramatic moments that captured historical attention, these ordinary experiences reveal the human dimension of political systems and the personal cost of ideological commitments. The Soviet Union under Stalin created conditions that tested human resilience in ways that most of us can barely imagine. Yet, the people who lived through those conditions found ways to maintain hope, love, creativity, and dignity despite circumstances that seemed designed to eliminate all four. Their success in preserving these essential human qualities under such extreme pressure provides both inspiration and instruction for understanding how people in any era can navigate the challenges of living with integrity within imperfect and sometimes oppressive social and political systems. As you settle deeper into your comfortable bed tonight, surrounded by the security and freedom that allows you to explore history as an intellectual adventure rather than a lived reality, you might reflect on the extraordinary privilege of being able to choose your own daily routines, express your authentic thoughts and feelings, and build relationships based on genuine affection rather than political calculation. The contrast between their constrained choices and your abundant options reveals both the progress that societies can make in expanding human freedom and the constant vigilance required to preserve the conditions that make such freedom possible. The people whose lives we have explored tonight, the factory workers and party commissars, the domestic servants and underground artists, the families crowded into communal apartments, and the officials relaxing in country dechas, are not heroes or villains in any simple sense, but ordinary human beings responding to extraordinary circumstances with a full range of human strengths and weaknesses, wisdom and folly, courage and fear that characterize our species in every era and under every political system. Their example reminds us that the test of any society lies not in its official promises or ideological claims, but in how it treats the daily needs and fundamental dignity of the people who must live within its boundaries and according to its rules. The gap between Soviet ideals and Soviet reality, between the promise of a worker's paradise and the lived experience of surveillance and control, provides sobering lessons about the difficulties of translating political theory into human practice, and the importance of maintaining skeptical attention to the difference between what systems claim to provide and what they actually deliver. And so, sleep finally beckons, and our long exploration of Stalin's Soviet Union draws to its peaceful close. Let us carry with us not just the historical knowledge we have gained, but also a deeper appreciation for the ordinary courage that allows people to maintain their humanity under any circumstances. The quiet wisdom that finds ways to preserve dignity and connection despite external pressure, and the enduring hope that sustains communities and families through even the most challenging periods of human history, in their daily struggles and small victories, in their careful words and silent sacrifices, in their patient endurance and persistent love. The people of Stalin's Soviet Union left us a legacy that transcends the political system they inhabited, and the historical moment they experience. They remind us that beneath all the grand structures of power and ideology that shape societies and determine the conditions of daily life, there remains the fundamental human capacity to choose compassion over cruelty, connection over isolation, and hope over despair, choices that ultimately determine not just individual survival, but the moral character of entire civilizations. Rest well, knowing that their example illuminates not just the past, but also the present, not just their particular struggles, but the universal human challenge of living with dignity and integrity in an imperfect world. And not just the history of one nation during one difficult period, but the ongoing story of human resilience, a creativity, and hope that continues to unfold in every community, in every family, where people choose to treat each other with kindness, respect, and love, despite the pressures and constraints that surround them.